I can.
I can. Okay, I'm sorry we are a little bit late, but now we are talking about aging, and we are talking about healthy aging. We'll talk about problems related to disabilities and illnesses maybe at the next session, but we'll talk about healthy aging. This is kind of a ideal scenario, which is not really what's going to happen. However, uh, when government policies and legislation is set about, they can't cater to each and everyone's particular or peculiar needs. They have to generalize. Okay? So first of all, they have to figure out, okay, let's consider everybody is going to age in a healthy way. Unrealistic, but that's the way they go about doing things. Okay, all right. So what happens when this population ages? Okay. Three major areas they have looked at: family planning, changing attitudes, and increased longevity or life expectancy. So each of these three things affect how a population reproduces and how it has to manage its older population. Okay. Um, Changing attitudes, remaining single or not marrying, or marrying at a later age. This is a worldwide phenomenon. This is a worldwide phenomenon. Okay? It is more pronounced in the Western countries, but it's catching on in the Asian countries as well. Okay? Uh, Wanting fewer children, even after you get married. Okay? And then, especially the female folks going into a profession, okay, and giving it, in a way, priority over being a traditional homemaker. Then, of course, we have a healthier environment, improved health access, and technological advances which make people live longer. So the first two areas, we have a lower fertility rate, and in the last category we have a lower mortality rate. So they all add up, adding to this phenomenon called population aging. Now let's look at a population that is aging and see how we can define it. These may look obvious to you, but when it is defined and you see it printed, then it suddenly makes impression. Okay. Increased incidence of pathophysiologic markers. Increased incidence of pathophysiologic markers. If you go to a room full of people, you can just look at them and decide, yeah, some guy is old, some guys are young. Okay. Now you look at me, I'm talking to you. But the moment I put this on, I'm like older than what I was without it. Okay. So my sight is giving way. So wearing glasses is a marker. Okay. Using a walking stick is a marker. Holding on to something like a handle to get into the bus or get out of the car or whatever. Those are all markers that we are getting old. Okay. Then you'll also find that there are more chronic illnesses: hypertension, obesity, diabetes, pneumonia and lung problems. Okay. Decreased capacity to work. We all notice that. Decreased physiologic reserves and adaptability. What is physiologic reserve? Physiologic reserve is what you can do a little bit more of compared to your usual way of doing things, uh, and can you sustain it? Um, I'm going to say something about myself again. Um, I used to be quite a athlete at one time, and I could run very fast. I yet like running. I prefer running and jogging rather than walking. That's just the way I am. And once in a while, I pretend I am 20 years old and I see, huh, let's see how fast I can run around this track kind of thing. And then I run about 100 yards, I have to give up. I've got old. Okay. My physiologic reserve has diminished. Natural. Okay. So that's how it works. Decreased social capital or influence. At your age, you may not realize this, but it's something that happens once you quit working, for example. Even students who are going to school, class, you feel there's a kind of a togetherness, a club. And then if you are taken away from that club, you kind of feel that you have lost something. Okay. That's the meaning of social capital. Your environment begins to change, and your feeling of importance, your feeling of influencing other people, you feel that capacity gets diminished. Okay. Then you use more medical services. And as you get older, you will find that the differences between people is much bigger than what it was. When you're in school as teenagers, everybody was equal. I mean, maybe, one girl wore red lipstick and the other one wore green. That's not the issue. But you were basically all equal. You went to university, you went to work, you suddenly notice, we are all the same, but we are all different. Our personalities begin to happen differently. So as you get older, these differences increase. Okay. In a way, it's like getting married. When you get married, everything is perfect. My goodness, as you get older, the marriage becomes a little bit like, you kind of get irritated, get upset, and expect something. It didn't happen, various kinds. But you're yet the two same people. Not that you hate each other or anything like that, but it's just different. So that's the way aging is. It's something that causes marked differences, heterogeneity, huh? And of course, another obvious thing, when you look at people visual, just by visual impression, you see more old people. So these are the different things you see in an aging population. Huh? Okay. Now let's look at the interpretations and causes and results and reasons for aging. There are two basic kind of philosophical ways of looking at it. One is with a positive image. Okay, you're living longer, all right. Then maybe you're earning more respect because of age, all right. Those are all positive things. People come to you for advice, yeah, very good. You feel good, positive image. You get invited to give a speech or a talk or to be the chief guest or to sign the wedding, whatever, or other, you feel you're wanted. Okay, those are all positive images of getting old. Then there's also the negative. You're getting feeble, you're getting sick, you're getting old, you can't see, various other things. So, aging as we know it, or rather the increase in life expectancy, okay, uh, is due to a lot of things, but it's mostly nutrition, sanitation, healthcare, education, and also economic well-being. Okay, and because of this, as I said, fertility rates also go down. Okay, but life expectancy goes up. Now the life expectancy is over 80 years in 33 countries. Okay, There's a lot of countries in the sense that uh, we have 193 countries, but these 33 countries we are talking about are mostly the so-called advanced or Western countries. Not all are Western, but what we call modern advanced countries. Okay, so this global phenomenon where people are getting old and the numbers are increasing, and you have some countries which provide very good services, very good benefits to their older people, and then there are countries that don't do as much. So you find that there's a big disparity. So one is always trying to learn from the other. How can we improve? How can we kind of do something better than what we are doing now? This is if the so-called government or whatever the organization decides they want to do something. So that willingness to want to improve the environment of the elders has to be first there. Okay, now this getting old business. There's a thing called a biological clock. We all have it. It doesn't have a second hand and a hour hand and a dial or anything like that. But you know, we have learned naturally that certain things happen at certain ages, chronological ages, and you know this is the way it goes. It's not exactly the same in everybody, but there is a slightly different rate at which it happens. So this concept called biological clock. Usually, ladies can't get pregnant after about the age of, let's say, on average 40, let's say. Okay, things like that. Like somebody can do the high jump, but maybe after the age of 40, they can't do high jump anymore. I mean, these are things that you know is kind of related to the chronological age. Okay, now there are some major theories about why we get old biologically. One is called programmed aging. That means it's like in your genes, you can't do much about it. It's there. Maybe you can influence it a little bit, but not a whole hell of a lot. Okay. And the other theory is that it happens because we get damaged. And the more the damage, and the earlier the damage, then you know your clock fails, and then you die early. Okay. Now, the damage theory kind of stresses a lot on the environment. Today, we are exposed to so many different influences. The air that we breathe is polluted. The water that we drink is, in a way, polluted compared to what it was maybe 200 years ago. Um, we, uh, we smoke, we drink, and we kind of intentionally cause things to go wrong. Um, we tend to break rest. You see, till about maybe 400 or 500 years ago, night and day were two very distinct times of the day. Nowadays, there's no night. We got lights the whole time. You know, I don't think the human species or even animal life evolved like that. And we know that for a fact because we can manipulate plants to do all kinds of things depending on the amount of light we give them. We can improve their color, we can improve their size, we can uh, improve the speed at which they produce fruit. Uh, we can do all kinds of things with plants. And in a way, I'm sure those same influences work on us. Okay. Light that we can control only came about very recently. First, when they discovered candles and lamps and stuff like that, it's even then only the rich people could afford it because the oil was expensive. Now, just turn the switch and there we have it. Okay? And it may be disturbing us quite a bit because we are just not aware of it. In fact, one of the theories of damage is that we are having too much of light. Okay? So we have various levels of damage. So depending on the level, you will age faster. And will the whole organism age, or will it be only individual organs, or just only the individual cells? And what about intracellular damage? What kind of things can happen there? I'm not going to get into that. Okay. I was going to show you a YouTube thing, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. Now we are just going to do some basic zoology. This is the simplest animal we know of, called the amoeba. And this is basically what I learned when I was in high school. It hasn't changed. But look at a cell nowadays, under the electron microscope and all these fancy gadgets. See the number of things that are inside the cell. So the more gadgets there are, the more things can go wrong. So some of these things were not even known during the time I went to high school. Okay? And each of them have now got a function, and they're supposed to do this and supposed to do that. So it's easy to understand how these things can be damaged. And here's a 3D version of it. Highly complex. Okay. So we have these theories, which is a genetic theory, a wear and tear theory, and a waste accumulation theory. Those are the three basic major theories. Okay? You can understand that just by looking at the titles. Genetic, wear and tear, and waste accumulation. Okay? I think we can do away with that. Okay, we can do away with that. Okay. We can do away with that. Okay, now I told you we set up this thing called Global Watch Index, set up only very recently in 2003. Okay. I'm sorry, yeah, that was set up in 2003. But the organization that started it is called HelpAge International. It's not a government organization. Okay? It's called an NGO. Everybody knows what an NGO is. Yeah, okay, all right. So the idea was to do something to help the elderly. It started in 1983, and 20 years later they came up with this measure. Okay? These people are recognized all over the world now as doing a lot of good. Okay? So much so that some governments are even giving them money, although they are not part of the government. Okay? It's interesting, their motto is age helps. Age is not a barrier. Age helps. Okay, that's what they say. It's very nice. Okay. All right. So their mission and their vision, okay, is a world in which all older people can lead dignified, active, healthy, and secure, safe lives. Okay. So this means we have to do things to make sure that people enjoy their rights to health care and to social services and economic and physical security. Okay. This is the kind of thing they are looking for. Individual responsibility, family, government, community. Okay. Now, everybody or anybody has heard of Mr. Tilak de Soisa? Has anybody heard of a motor car company called AMW? He's the owner. All right. He's from a very rich family in the Kalutara area. Okay. And he was made the chairman of this particular association. Okay. His term of office has now finished. Okay? He was chairman since till June of 2015. Okay, during which time a lot of things happened, and he was given a lot of respect for that. Okay, so HelpAge International puts older men and women at the heart of their work. They work together with like-minded organizations, provide services where governments do not do anything or help very little. It also does a lot of work for emergencies like flood relief and earthquake relief and things like that. Okay. They also do a lot of monitoring of services that are done by certain countries and certain organizations, just to see whether they are doing what they say they are doing. Other people start all kinds of charities and a lot of movements, make a lot of money kind of thing, and they disappear. These guys keep a tab to make sure that old people are not being exploited, using the term old age. Okay? And therefore now they are beginning to persuade policymakers, basically politicians, okay, to address the issues regarding aging. All right. That we don't need. Okay. Okay, now we talked about the 4 areas. We're talking about income, health, employment and education, and enabling environments. They look at those 4 things with 13 other indicators contributing to it. Okay, and now we'll look at some of the rankings and see. Oh, what am I doing now? Okay, 91 countries, and this is in 2013. Number 1 in the world, Sweden, Norway, Germany, Netherlands. Basically like Northern Europe, we can say, huh? Okay. USA is number 8. Australia is number 14. Okay. Whereabouts is Japan? Number 10. Okay. Sri Lanka? Whereabouts is it? 36. Somewhere here. There we are. Sri Lanka is 36. Okay. Afghanistan is 91. Pakistan is 89. Okay. All the heavily populated countries are represented here. Okay. This is in 2013. Okay. And this is in 2014. Sri Lanka has dropped from being 36 to somewhere further down to number 43. So we are going in the wrong direction kind of thing, huh? At least over that 1 year. Okay. But the countries at the top are basically the same. Okay. Now you got to understand these are also very rich countries. They have very slow growing populations or only very stable populations. They are not going up very rapidly. Okay. And they happen to be, part of a larger group of countries called either North America or Europe, which traditionally have had very strong economies. Okay. All right. Now, let's take Sri Lanka and see what happens. We have about 3 million people over the age of 60. Now remember, it's not 65, 60. Okay. All right. And we have about 13%. Now it's about 14%. Okay, over the age of 60. And this is how it is projected to go in the future, where Sri Lankan's population is concerned. And if you look at this, these are those 4 domains that we were talking about. And the right half of this key this part, the left half here, my left, and the right part here, this is where the country is concerned, and this is for the whole area, or let's say Southeast Asia. Okay, so we are doing, in a way, a lot better. The darker shades, we are doing a lot better than the other countries in the area. So that's good. Within the Asian countries, we are doing pretty well. Despite the fact, we'll learn later on, that the government is not doing as much as they should. Which means that family is basically the people who are looking after the old people. The government programs have not made a big impact as yet, as it were. Okay. Okay. In the SAARC area, Sri Lanka has the highest proportion of older people. Okay. This is projected to rise to 20% to 25% by 2041. Parallel to this, the working age population will keep falling. Okay. This is similar to what has happened in many East Asian countries. Okay. This will result in a large number of retired people living longer with no structured employment income. Okay. And they have prospects of diminished support services and infrastructure. This is the situation they are in. Okay. In Sri Lanka, mandatory retirement age for public servants is 60 years, but recently they are talking about raising it to 65. That's what Mr. Maitripala Sirisena is talking about. This is Sri Lanka's population pyramid as of 2014, and this part here is about 13 to 14% of the population. Now let's look at Australia. Now, why did I take Australia? Because it has about the same population as Sri Lanka. It is about the same population, okay? And it's ranked 14. Now, this ranking is a 1, 2, 3, 4 order, but there is also another value they look at, the ideal value being 100. Okay, that means if they look at so many areas and they give marks, if you get full marks in all those areas, you get a total score of 100. So Australia gets 77 out of 100. Okay. This population of Australia is comparable to that of Sri Lanka. Okay. In Australia, though, the percentage of the population over 60 is, at the moment, almost 20%. It's more than Sri Lanka. Okay. All right. Australia is 14th. It scores very highly in health and employment and education, and it ranks lower on income security. 36% of the older people have an income less than half the country's average income. Now, this is a very general statement, but it also means a lot. You take the country's average income, and people who are retired are getting 1/3 of that income. I mean, that's good. In Sri Lanka, if you work for the government, you get a pension. Well, that's because you work for the government. If you didn't work for the government, There's nothing coming. But in Australia, you get something. And it's 1/3 of the average income of the country, which is very good. Obviously, the country is rich. That's why they can give that money. Okay? So, Australia has a lot of natural resources. So, it's a very rich country. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of luxury. Huh? Okay. Despite that, look at what they feel in Australia, according to HelpAge. Okay. Older people's perception of physical safety and satisfaction with public transport is relatively low. Okay. But their health and education and employment domains, their score is very high. Okay. This is the way the Australian population is going to change. Okay. From about 20% now, it's going to go to 30% in another 30 years. Okay. Another 30 years. All right. We're talking about age 60. Okay. If you look at age 80, presently it has about 4%. It's going to go up to about 9%. We're talking about 80 now. Talking about lifespan extending. Policy versus legislation. All countries have policies and all countries have legislation. A policy is basically a statement saying, this is what we like to do. It does not necessarily mean that you can afford to do it or that you have the power to do it. So policy is a very general statement. Legislation is a very definite statement. It means you have created a law saying this is what you should do. It's a law. So people can go to court and say, hey, I'm supposed to get 100 rupees a month. You haven't given it to me for the last 3 or 4 months. The law says I should get it. So legislation is more powerful than policy. So now let's look at Australia here. They introduced a national policy in 2002. Remember, all over the world, I said, looking into old age affairs are very recent things in history. Huh? Okay, all right. So HelpAge has taken the year 2002 from which to start measuring things in various countries. Okay. All right. So in 2004, between 2004 and 2009, Australia has introduced various policies. National legislation for older people. They don't seem to have any legislation, but they have a policy, and this policy is promoting activities. But it's not in a way like a legislated. It can be legislated, but in very indirect ways. Okay. One of the things is regarding income. Okay, and the word they use in aging is called social pension. Okay, not pension related to work. Pension related to just being old. So, I mean, in Sri Lanka, it's like, Santosam, you are getting something for nothing. If you have worked for it and you have earned a pension, that's because of your work, right? But this is just purely because you're old. Okay, and then it comes to this. Okay, supposing a couple, husband and wife, okay, they're married. The husband works and he gets a pension when he retires. In a way, the wife does not get any pension, he gets a pension, but when he dies, the wife will also get some pension. Okay? But in some countries, when the husband retires, the husband gets a pension and the wife also gets a pension. So these are some of the what can happen in some of the rich countries, but in Sri Lanka, it's not quite that. Okay. All right. So social pensions are non-contributory, which means you haven't had to work at some time and contribute any money from which you can take the money back. Okay. This is money given from the government to an older person just because they are a citizen of the country. Whether they worked or not important. Okay. Now let's see. In US dollars, presently, the Australian government pays almost $1,500 a month. Okay. In Australian dollars, 1,506. Okay. And this amount of money that the government spends on this is about 1/4 of the gross domestic product of the country. They are spending a lot of money. They are spending a lot of money. Okay. Age of eligibility is age 65. Okay. Now here's a very interesting statement. Means tested. Anybody understand what that means? Means tested. The word means whether you have the ability to look after yourself. So if you have worked hard and maybe bought 3 or 4 houses and you have an income from that, and you bought a piece of land and it's got coconuts and you are getting an income from that, then what the government does is it reduces the amount of money they give, because they say, you have the means, you have the money already, please, we are not going to give you as much. We'll give you something, but not as much as if somebody didn't have anything. There are various ways of looking at it and say, oh, that's not fair, I worked, give me my full amount. But that's not the way politicians look at it. Okay? So in a lot of countries, if you are already adequate, I don't want to use the word rich, if you are socially stable, they do what is called the means test. And people try to cheat. Okay? But eventually, in a philosophical way, yeah, if you have enough, come on, give it to people who don't have enough, kind of thing. That theory also works. Okay? So this is possible in a high-income country, what they call OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. There are 8 or 9 countries which are considered OECD. Okay? Australia happens to be one of them. So because they have a lot of money, they can afford to have these programs. In fact, if you read all the different programs, Australia is the best country to go for old age care. They do wonderfully well. All right, Sri Lanka, 36 out of 91, but now 43. That value out of 100, we only get about 58 marks. Okay, same population as Australia, and we have about 2.7 million over the age of 60, which is about 13%. But we rank the best in Southeast Asia. Now let's look at those individual factors. For enabling environment, we get 27 out of 100, and for education, we get 37 out of 100. Okay, this is very interesting. According to that study, 79% of older people say they feel safe walking on their own at night. I find that difficult to believe. But these are the responses people have given to the questions that have been asked. So either the people are dishonest, or the organization that is doing this research is not asking the proper questions or something like that. But I found that this figure doesn't really fit my image of my own country. How many people here feel safe walking alone at night? Everybody's. You feel safe. Are you talking about anywhere or just in your neighborhood? Anywhere, huh? In your neighborhood, yeah, yeah, okay. I also feel safe in my neighborhood, but that may be a false sense of security, but at least that's the way I feel. So if somebody asks me the question, I'll say, yes, I feel safe. Okay. But if you ask the ladies, they usually will say, no, 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 I don't feel safe anywhere. I don't feel safe anywhere. Okay. In Sri Lanka, a lot of the people, almost 64%, have a good level of education, which means also that after retirement, that education can be used or should be used, put to some use, to for the betterment of the country and also for the betterment of that individual. That person has something to contribute. Okay. Uh, According to HelpAge, okay, Sri Lankans are asking the government to continue and expand cash transfer to the poorest of the older people. Um, who determines who's the poorest? Okay, these are the projections of Sri Lankan population. Okay, at the moment we have about 1.6% of the population over the age of 80, and it will be 6% in 2050, and over 60 would be 28% from the present 14%. Okay, now social pensions are non-contributory cash transfers. There is no social pension in Sri Lanka. Okay, and um, introduction of national policy on aging since 2002. Ooh, um, before 2002, we had this national policy. As I said, policy is not legislation. Okay, policy. After that, there was no further action kind of taken. Uh, although they have a secretariat for the elderly now. Now, just in preparation for this lecture, and based on that last slide, I was telling myself, what do I know about the Samudri program? I hear a lot about it on TV. I read a lot about it on the paper, but what is this Samudri program? I really didn't know much about it because I didn't live in the country for a long time, so I never got close to it. But there have been some studies done by some world bodies like the International Monetary Fund, the Asian Development Bank, and United Nations. And here's an interesting study, case study done in May of 2017, very recently. Okay. Now, these are the kinds of things that you folks will have to do once you get your master's degree. You will kind of go into positions where you will have to do research and find solutions to problems and things like that. Okay, so in brief, the Sri Lankan government launched its Samudri or Prosperity Program in 1995. So it's been in operation now for about 22 years. Okay, and the main goal was reducing poverty. It had a wide network of national and local level officials administering its activities and was led by its own minister or ministry. Okay. However, it lacked a structured mechanism for management, monitoring, and evaluation that made the program vulnerable to politicians. So what they are trying to say is that this is something that was done more for the politicians than for the masses. Okay, and The word for that is called corruption. In addition, its welfare activities have been criticized for promoting dependency rather than aiding the socio-economic development of Sri Lankan citizens. So what you're doing is, by giving, you're sometimes making people get more dependent. You're not paying importance to providing what they call an enabling environment. These are not 100% true statements, but most of the time that's what they say when they analyze what has happened. Now, I have brought the whole study results here on the screen. You can read it at your leisure, okay? And overall, poverty rates in Sri Lanka have been reduced since the program started. On the other hand, the main failure of the program has been in the targeting of beneficiaries. It has been criticized for having a bias in the distribution of resources and thus failing to address the population that most needs the support, while providing aid to households that do not fit the poverty criteria. This is where politics comes in. This is where politicization comes in. Okay. In 2007, the Center for Poverty Analysis found that the Samurdhi Food Stamp Program, which constitutes 80% of the budget, that's a lot of money, okay, misses about 40% of the households in the poorest quintiles portion, okay, while almost 44% of the budget goes to households in the top quintiles. So the people who most need it get very little, people who don't need it get a lot. It's like this means test I was talking about. Okay, so these programs sometimes can be manipulated for political advantage rather than for the benefit of the people. Okay. You can read the summary of this. Okay. Now let's look at the USA, a very rich country, or so you may think. It is not as rich as a lot of people imagine it is, but at least one thing is for sure, they work very hard. They work very hard. Okay, so global age, they put them, Age Watch puts their rank as 8 out of 91, and they get a score of almost 84, which is very good. Okay, it's a population of 300 and it's more than that. It's about 325 million now. Okay, and the population over 60 is 60.4 million, 3 times the population of Sri Lanka. The over 60 population, 3 times the population of Sri Lanka. Okay, and at the moment, their over 60 population is about 20%, 1/5 of their population. Interestingly, at the moment, these people who are over 60 in the United States are the richest people in the United States, are the richest people. Okay. Lots of reasons for that. One is that they are people who were working during the time that the American economy was booming. So that means they contributed a lot of money towards their retirement. And now all that money is coming back to them. They are the richest class of people, people over the age of 60. So there are lots of new businesses and services starting to serve these people in everything. Amusement, transport, dining means like, going out to eat and this and that. Okay. Sports activities. Okay. One of them is so-called memory care. Very fashionable. They want to spend money to make sure their memory gets better. That's what they want to do. That's fine with me. That's how they do it. They are very rich. Okay? Very rich. One more thing. Not only are the Americans very rich, they are very generous. Very generous. generous. It's a totally different mentality to people in Southeast Asia. I mean, we are also generous in our own little way, but in terms of proportion, oof, the money they give to churches, schools, universities, for various other projects, they give a lot of money away, a lot of money away, very generous, especially to education institutes, especially to like the private universities that they attended when they were going to university kind of thing. Some of the budgets of those private universities is bigger than the budget of the country of Sri Lanka. It's not from the government. It's all what people have donated. Obviously, they won't donate to some place that's not going to produce results. They're not that foolish. So they donate to people who can produce results. That's the unique system of America. It's a very generous country. All right. Okay. 90% of people over 50 say they have relatives or friends they can count on when they are in trouble. And 67% are satisfied with the local public transport. America, when you're living there, people are always complaining about two things in America. One is public transport, and the other one is the postal service. Okay, poor fellows, the postal service is having a hard time. Not for anything else, but everything began to go wrong with faxes and the internet and iPhones and smartphones. Very few people write letters anymore. Occasionally you will send a Christmas card or a birthday card or send a package to your grandmother or something, So their income just dropped. But the people expected the service to be the same as before. It just can't work. Okay. So the next thing is public transport. Almost nobody in America uses public transport. They got the best buses, and they're air conditioned, and you got music, and it's warmed in the winter, and you have a front entrance and a back entrance, and you can put your bicycle in there and various things. But very few people in the United States use public transport because everybody owns a car. Everybody goes around by car. Okay? So the people who use it are always complaining. Although the quality of the transport, in my opinion, is better than any place else in the world. But that's the way the Americans look at it. Okay. Okay. And this is the way their population will increase in the future. You can notice that the percentage of people over the age of 80 is going up to about 8% from what it is right now, okay, which is about 4%. It's going to double. Okay. All right. Now, social pensions are non-contributory. We read that in the past. Okay. Introduction of policies since 2002. They haven't introduced anything new, although they had policies from before 2002. Okay. They give it special names. They don't call it social pension, and they don't call it old age pension. They call it old age supplemental income benefit. Old age supplemental income benefit. When did they introduce it? In 1935. Okay. And at the moment, if you are an older person, you get 674 US dollars. I know that for a fact because my wife gets that every month. So based on that, I tell her I'm not giving her pocket money. You see how aging affects us? Okay. So, and that accounts for about 17% of the American GDP. A big chunk of their money goes to support the older people. Okay. Age of eligibility is 65. Okay. There's a means test. There's a means test. Okay. All right. That's about Australia. Let's forget about that. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about elder care in Sri Lanka and the current status. Okay. This part is not information from me, but it's from a Dr. Balasurya. Uh, she put this information together around 2010, I believe. Okay. We'll expand on it next time. Give me about another 10 minutes here. Okay. Services available for elders through the government of Sri Lanka. We have the National Council, established in 2002. The council has 15 members, chaired by the Ministry of Social Services and Welfare. The objectives are promoting the rights of elders, identifying problems, and making and implementing policies. Policies, remember, not legislation, policies. Implementing various types of programs by using their knowledge and experience, conducting awareness programs for elders, providing guidance and various types of welfare assistance for low-level income, and updating the database related to these things. Okay. Maintenance board for elders to look into claims for maintenance by parents who are neglected by their children. We have that situation where parents try to legally enforce their children to look after them. And some action has been taken in that regard. Okay, it's another kind of expression of how we care or how we don't care for our parents. Okay, this is because the family unit is disintegrating because of urbanization and the breakdown of the nuclear family. Okay, elderly identity cards, issue of eye lenses for low income people, daycare centers. Now, some of these are really happening. Some of these are really happening. Okay, in very small scale, maybe not run perfectly, but at least it's a start, which is very good. Okay, and there are lots of NGOs who are doing the same thing. Okay. Um, Daycare centers, the government is giving assistance up to 25,000 rupees for purchase of equipment. Establishment of village committees to look into this. Provision of an old age pension to elders over 70 years. They are looking into this. Okay, it has not been made legislation as yet. Okay. Elders desk has been opened at the Legal Aids Commission to help the needy elders. Okay. Remember, we were talking about instrumental aids, not aid, activities of daily living, and some of these are related to what happened to my house. Somebody else sold it, my children sold it without telling us. All these legal problems that come up, the old people can't handle it. So having a legal desk is a big thing. It's a big thing. I think it's a very useful thing. Okay, and these are what the NGOs do also. Okay. 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 Another couple of slides and finish. Problems faced by the elderly in Sri Lanka. Elderly patients receive no priority in hospitals and are managed in a common ward with no specialist geriatricians. This is something that really needs to be seen to, because these people are really desperate. Okay? Junior doctors lack knowledge and skills to manage geriatric complaints. Okay? Delirium, dementia, depression are usually overlooked because they are not considered, the signs and symptoms are not as obvious and glamorous as like high blood pressure or diabetes or something, where more action is kind of visible. No specialist geriatricians in the country. There are no rehabilitation facilities and equipment and trained manpower for the elderly. No community geriatric services, lack of trained nurses and healthcare workers who can start up such a service, inadequate number of nursing homes and elderly care homes. These are various proposals. You can read that. Okay. All right. Caring for the elderly in Sri Lanka is now becoming a big business. It's becoming a big business. There's nothing wrong in it becoming a business if the quality of the service is looked after, kind of thing, or is managed carefully. And usually that's where the problem has an issue. You can start a company and give it a fancy name, and have caretakers dressed up in fancy clothes and look very attractive. But if they are not trained, in what they're supposed to do, then they are being cheated. And that's where a lot of problems come. Two of our master's students from last year have just submitted their theses, and both have done brilliant work, very nice work. And I think they will probably get some recognition, because I'm sure that their theses will get published. One is about matching the needs of the elderly versus the skills of the caregiver. Unless they are matched, it's just nonsense. So they have to be matched in a lot of different ways. Another one is based on barriers to get health services for the elderly. And this study was done in the Kaduwela area, looking at all the different barriers that are there in terms of trying to get health. From transport to where the facility is, how many steps are there, how many ramps are there, how high is the reception desk, can you talk in your language, all these different barriers. Two very nice papers, and I think it should be like required reading for the audience. We have two very nice studies done by our own IIHS executive master's students. Okay, so next time I'll give you the article itself, but we can't really publish that right now till the thesis is accepted by Malaysia. Okay, all right. So we'll stop there today, and we'll do something next week, including a documentary that's about 50 minutes long. It's about elderly care in the United States and the problems associated with it and what we can learn from it. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Now, it's not easy talking for 3 hours, but just I want you to know, did I speak loud enough?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not using a sound system. Okay, all right, okay. Did I speak too fast?
No.
All right, okay, good.